Have you ever experienced something so crippling in your life that has made you feel broken? I have. Are you someone who has a giving heart but is struggling to feel good themselves? Are you consistently putting your needs aside to take care of everyone else? If so, you're not alone. Giving starts with giving to yourself so that you are able to give of yourself to other people. Isn't it time you took back control and discovered what makes you tick? Join me in my journey and find out how you can feel better about yourself, live your best life, and share that with others. Thinking of yourself, it doesn't make you selfish. It makes you brave. I'm Nelia, and this is the Giving Starts With You podcast. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Giving Starts With You podcast. Thank you so much for joining us again for another episode. I love having you here. I love your comments. Thank you for being a part of the community. I started this podcast about a year ago now, and the main reason I started the show was to share inspirational messages and stories of adversity, shine a light on bravery, and create a community so that we don't feel alone. And that's one of the main reasons why JL Keez is here today. She's going to show you, and through her story, you are going to feel that you are not alone. You are going to feel that there are other people just like you and me. So I'd like to welcome JL Keez to the show. How are you today?
I am feeling really, really good, thank you. Although I've just dragged myself out of bed to be here because it's early in Australia. But I've been really looking forward to meeting you, Nelia, because we haven't met actually before, but we've communicated a lot between countries. And I'm looking forward to sharing with your audience this morning as well. And so I look forward to getting started.
Thank you. What time is it in Australia?
It's 8:30 a.m. in the morning. Not that that's really, really early, but beside the work that I do here, I still do relief teaching, and we're actually on holidays from teaching. So I was hoping to get a bit of a sleep in. But anyway, I would prefer to be up and be here. So...
But it is tough, when I'm in Canada and you're in Australia to make, everything work out. So I'm just going to tell people a little bit more about you, introduce you, and then... So JL Keez is a survivor of a 9-year struggle with anorexia nervosa and many years enduring associated illnesses. She dedicates her life to empowering those impacted by eating disorders and related debilitating conditions. She is a Reality Therapy Certified Counsellor, speaker, and teacher. Her detailed insights are powerfully portrayed in her memoir, Anorexia Unlocked: Understanding Your Story Through Mine. Her passionate delivery on the topic, How We Relate, Impacts, for the Reality Therapy Institute of Australia, demonstrated her strength as an inspirational voice within her subject area. JL Keez educates sufferers of eating disorders and the associated illnesses through educational programs, inspirational speaking, and books. Each medium shared is authentic, honest, highly informative, and extremely relatable. Thank you so much for taking the time out today to come and be on the show and to share your experiences with us.
Absolutely honored. Thank you.
So where does this story begin? If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here and what you're speaking about today.
Yeah, sure. Whenever someone says, what's your story? I always say, how long have you got? So I will try to nutshell it to convey sort of what happened to me and what impacted me. So I was born on a farm many, many years ago now. And I think my story began from the moment I was conceived, actually. But it really embedded itself in me when I turned 2. It was the morning of my birthday. We were a church-going family. So on that Sunday morning when it was my birthday, we were driving out of the farm and there was an internal gate. And as we approached that internal gate from the back seat of the car, I went to deliver a message to my mother. And upon doing so, my father realised exactly what I was about to say. So he silenced me rather rapidly with a backhanded whack and ordered me out of the car that morning and told me that I wasn't going to church that day and that I would be staying home. And that's pretty daunting in itself as a 2-year-old, to be told that you're going to stay home on this huge farm on your own.
Completely on your own.
Completely on my own. So I dutifully did that and closed the internal gate and just watched the black Zephyr drive away. I'm aging myself here. And he did return and I was picked up. But that moment in time was the most pivotal moment which began to shape me and decide who I was as a person moving forward. So what had happened? I had been sexually abused. I was also finding myself as a bright, bubbly, creative little blonde girl in an environment, and I do preempt this every time I talk about my story, there is no blame. There is just acknowledgement and awareness of how we relate has the opportunity to impact us and our growth and development. So every player in my story brought their own story with them, and they reacted and responded according to the messages they lived with, according to the way they were taught about how life worked. It wasn't great for any of us, but as the years unfold, we learn more and more about this area of mental health and mental development and what is underneath it and what lies beneath there. And hopefully through education and gaining an awareness and knowledge and all of those things, we're starting to do life a little bit better, particularly our relationships and our connections, and begin to understand that they are a powerful contributor to mental health development. So moving forward from there, I found myself in this very controlled upbringing with a very angry father. He brought his angers into that forum or into that space. Huge religious undertones, which really constricted what I could and couldn't do. Punishment was high on the agenda and all of those things. So over the unfolding years, I took with me the message that morning that embedded itself in my brain. You'll be blamed. I'll be killed. All of those messages, and it will all be on my fault. So the responsibility of everything that had happened to me all of a sudden became mine, and I wore it like a glove. And so my perception of the world became one of punishment, one of looking over my shoulder and making sure that I became the perfectionist and the person I felt I needed to be in order to avoid all of those horrible things from happening. So with that dialogue running through and creating my agenda, that was the life I began to see as well. So it wouldn't have mattered if people, came in and probably accepted me. I would still somehow see it as non-acceptance. But unfortunately, as I went forward, my father decided when I was 6 that he would go into the religious ministry. So we shifted to Adelaide. And for 4 years, I went to 2 different schools there. The world shrank again because we just mixed with people connected to that religion. And I also then endured bullying. I went to 2 different schools. It was exclusion, isolation, bullying, feeling very, very alone through those years and desperately adopting behaviours that I thought would see acceptance come through the door, and it never ever worked. It never does. So we spent 4 years there, 3 years down at Port Macdonald, a little fishing village here in South Australia. And before we left there, I went down there from the ages of 10 to 12. And during that time, I was beginning to grow and become aware of the way people lived and began to mix with people and go, hang on, you're swearing, you've got lots of money, you actually go to cabarets and drink yourself blind and you do all these naughty things, but you're not getting punished. So confusion was another layer. How come you can do that and get away with it? But if I do it, I'm going to be punished in some way. So confusion added my wonderings about life and how it worked. And then 3 years later, off I went to Kimber. I'd become a top athlete, a straight A student, all of those things that I became. And the unpopularity certainly was just in my face every day. I was picked on, I was isolated, all of that. So the fact that an eating disorder, and that's in a nutshell, there's so much more to that story, but at 15, Anorexia Nervosa found its way to me. And at the time, because I'm quite a bit older, the awareness around eating disorders and the fact that they even existed wasn't a medical thing. So for 9 years, I just did that to myself. No one asked the questions. I went from a strong athlete, winning everything, creating records, to a barely there existence. And no one ever asked the question. I mean, my mother did take me to the doctor and say, look, this is what's happening to my daughter. And the doctor was, oh, yeah, what are you eating? Oh, that sounds all right to me. You know, there was no connection made at all. So, but at 24, I was married now and living in Victoria. So I'd shifted again. My life is full of shifting. And I met a psychiatrist there, and that was the first time I heard anorexia nervosa. And I looked at the paperwork and went, wow, this is me. But fear and anxiety just became my life. So even though I discovered what I was doing to myself, the fears of actually changing that whoosh, came through the door, sat up at me, but they were never identified. I was simply forced to put the weight back on, with the understanding that when you put the weight back on, all will be forgiven. You'll be fine, and we won't have to see you again. You know, yay! But that didn't happen. I fearfully restored the weight over probably a couple of years, but then in its place became chronic fatigue, debilitating 2-day migraines where I just wanted to cut my head off. Anxiety, of course, fear-driven behaviours, OCD joined the repertoire when I became pregnant. I just OCD'd about everything and did for about the next 10 years. And suicidal depression joined me after I gave birth to my second child, a little girl. And that was the most debilitating of all of the mental illnesses. That's the one I never want returning to me. So I then went blind to every healing modality that I could discover. I would go into, but none of them helped me until we shifted back to Adelaide with 2 young children. And thinking that this was going to be it, we then shifted up to Darwin, which is the north of Australia. My husband applied for a job that I didn't know he'd done, and we ended up in Darwin, and that broke me. Fear was huge. Darwin, people from Darwin, you're beautiful people, but at the time and who I was, I could not cope with the environment that presented itself to me there. And my children were just going backwards. My son was really suffering, and my marriage failed. And I brought the children home. We'd rented out our 2-acre property, so I brought them back to that property. At that time, I wanted to know how to emotionally support these little ones through that process and that change, that huge change in their life. And I was introduced to a lady called Joan Hookstad, who practiced reality therapy underpinned by choice theory. And she sort of applauded me with how Colin and I were helping the children through that time. But by the end of the first session, and with her intuitiveness, and because my life had once been her life, she could see the similarities, and she asked that question, I want to work with you, I want to know your story. And I just went, no, I've done way too much. And but probably a couple of weeks later, I was sitting on a balcony here with a girlfriend, and we were chatting all things, you know, difficult in life and whatever. And she asked that pivotal question that came to me, I guess, at the right time for when I was ready to now move forward and actually recover. And she said, JL, do you think there was something that happened in your life that has created what is happening for you? And that very question, which had never been asked of me before, just saw me go from the chatty morning cuppa mama, you know, while the kids were at kinder or wherever they were. And I just flew under her table and shook and went into anxiety and fear. And when I sort of recovered from that, we just looked at each other and went, So I went back to Joan. I made that first appointment with her, and it was the work that she did and the process that she took me through that not only made sense of why my body hurt, but made a lot of sense of who I had become and why I had become that person at that point in time. By now I was 37. So sorry, that was a long nutshell.
That's okay. There's so much I want to say. Oh my goodness. First of all, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you went through those things. And I know that you know none of that was your fault. And from one woman to another. I'm sorry. Um,
Well, thank you. But I'm also sorry for, we all bring our stories to these sort of platforms. And I really am grateful that you're bringing your story for the people that you will help as well. And, to the audience that are listening today, as you and I've said when we first met this morning, it's all about helping others and others understanding that your story is important and you deserve to have it heard and unraveled and unlocked so that you can move forward in a positive direction in your life. So, yeah.
Thank you. Because I believe that it heals ourselves as well as others. So there's nobody loses, everybody wins.
That's right. That's right.
At the beginning of our conversation, I found it so wise because you had said right at the beginning, you said that each person is the way that they are because of how they were brought up and their own story. They all have their own story. And I don't think, at the time when things are happening to us, we don't see that. We're way too young. But as an adult, when we figure that out, is so wise, I think. It doesn't excuse anything, but it helps us, I think, from, just humanity point, it just helps us understand maybe why. Because when we're not blaming ourselves and we're not blaming them as well, it does help, because we're not here to blame anyone. And I don't know, when you said that, I just think more people need to realize that people have their own story. At one point in my life, I said, oh my goodness, I realized as a teenager, my parents are so much more than just my mom and dad. Like, they're actual people. Like, there was a separation there. And now having my child, I'm like, I'm so much more than just a mom. I'm a woman who grew up with her, anxieties, with her anger, with everything. And that shapes what kind of person I am, good or bad. So the fact that you said that, it just stuck with me, because I think it's so important that we realize that, so that we don't blame. It just helps us to understand. But yes, there is no excuse, no excuse for any of it, honestly. But yeah, I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, I think that was something that I need to come to terms with, because when you first start to work on a story like the one that I have, the one that you have, and you realize that there's parents and adults around you that are involved in that story, you can add to your anger, you can add to perhaps revenge or whatever emotions, surface for you when you're beginning to acknowledge your story. And I think a powerful way of dealing with that for us as someone who wants to recover and wants to heal is to step back and be mature enough, I suppose, to say, hey, these are individual people. Everything you just said, Nelia, these are individual people that have got their own story, their own messages, their own shaping. And until they are prepared to look at that and change the way, they are going to stay like that. And so you're hitting your head against a brick wall if you want to change it, unless they want to change it. But in understanding, particularly standing, that's right, taking the time to stand in my father's shoes and learn about him as a child. And I did that. What experience did you have as a child that shaped you? What happened to you? What messages, what relationship connections did you have? What adversities and all of those things that saw you become the man who felt he had to go into the religious ministry because that might bring acceptance through to. He was really living my story as well. But unfortunately for him, he never got to the point of, enough, I'm going to look at who I really am. I'm going to stop playing this game. And once you do that, you go, oh, it changes how you deal with it and changes your perspective. And also allows me, one of the things I found difficult in my recovery was giving myself permission to do it differently.
I love
upbringing, this is how it is, this is how life is, bingo, bango, leave it at that. But giving yourself permission to do it different and step outside of the box that you were put in, that was a huge undertaking for me as well, because of the fear that was wrapped around me as well. So yeah, I'm probably blurring on a bit now, but just sort of adding to what you've just indicated. And I think that might be helpful. There may be someone listening to us today that goes, hang on, I never thought to do that. I want to understand who my mum is. She was the one that did all this to me, or he did that, or whatever. let's just step back and look at what shaped them. So actually they can't do it any other way. Far out, you know.
Don't know better sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's right when if you haven't begun the healing process, I think it's too early to do that. It's too early to put the anger aside. Sometimes, you know, it's part of the whole journey. But it's incredible because those people may never realize it themselves because they haven't gone on the healing journey. They're still in the same spot. That's why I respect so much when somebody like you comes on and you've done the work and now you want to help other people. So yeah, I respect that a lot. It just, we talk a lot about self-love on this show and how the opinions that you think people have of you, they change who you are. So all of these things that happened to you, they change you, obviously. And would you agree that you spent, like, you know, as a teenager and you were moving from one place to another, do you agree that perhaps you were seeking that validation all the time, not just trying not to be in trouble so you didn't get punished? Like, did you find that you were always trying to be too perfect and it was never good enough? Like, how did it affect your self-love for yourself?
I think shifting all the time, because I had that experience at 2 and then it was added to with other experiences along the way. It just got deeper and deeper, you know, that need to be perfect. If I do this, you know, it saved me from being hit, being punished, being blamed and all of those things. And then it was mirrored in the schoolyard. You know, when I saw a rejection or what I thought was rejection, I would shut down really quickly. And even as an adult, I can remember one thing in particular. We were out and I was in my, I was about 20 and we were socializing in a group. And for some reason, I allowed this shutdown person to come out and for the real person to come out. And the minute I saw that male over there go, oh my goodness, we've never seen you, I saw it as rejection. Looking back now, I was sort of, wow, let's see more of this side of you. But instead, so I just shut down again. But so the impact it had, I was always looking over my shoulder, always looking for acceptance. And because the isolation and bullying supported the fact that you're rejected, then, yeah, sorry, what was your question? Because I don't think I'm answering.
Just find, no, it's fine. I just, you know, a big thing for me is I know that the way people think about me, whether or not I agree, makes it true. So with all these things happening, you didn't really have time to figure out who you were because you had to be everything they wanted you to be perfectly. That's what it sounds like, right?
Yes.
So it doesn't really feel like you had time to discover who you were. That's so hard, especially as a teenager. You didn't have a safe place because you had home. And then, you know, a lot of people, like now with COVID and the pandemic, you know, school was a lot of people's safe place. And you didn't have either, you had nowhere that you felt you could be yourself. So I just wonder how all these expectations and all these things, how it affected how you felt about yourself. Like, did you blame yourself or did you know this is them and not me, like at that age?
At that age, no, I don't think. I think as we've indicated before, life just happens. And as a child growing up, you accept what is happening around you without questioning it. I think I just spent, I don't think I ever questioned it, not about me and who I was, and because you don't have that level of awareness as a child growing up.
That's all you knew, right?
That's all you know. But certainly when I shifted up to Kimber and I was 13, 14 and 15, and you're going through that time where people are coming out and stamping themselves on themselves. And if I look back now, I probably did in a way look at other girls in particular, you know, coming into the schoolyard, the popular girls, the ones that had the boyfriends and all that. And I did do that comparison. What's the difference between you and me? You know, you're an athlete too. I win everything. You sort of come in second or third to me. Why is that? You know, and you're popular because of it, but I'm not. So then what is the difference between the popular people, the people that had friends and me? And because you don't have those conversations to get that sorted out with a trusted adult, I didn't have that. You're sort of winging it along the way. So I don't think I even gave it particular thought. Like, I didn't sit in my bedroom at night and go, now, she wears her hair like that and her dress that length. And so if I do all of those things, then I'll be accepted. But I think somewhere subconsciously I was doing that. And I do know that I started to, particularly when I got to 16 and 17, that was the time when everyone experimented with smoking. So I thought, ugh. So I, had a couple of smokes once, and that was it. I couldn't understand why anybody did it. But I thought, well, at least if I go behind that shed and do that, look like I'm doing the process, maybe I'll be accepted. That still didn't work. So I was just in this never-ending world of confusion of, what do I have to do to be accepted? Why aren't I liked? And then I began to put it down to, I'm the minister's daughter. And, theoretically, ministers' daughters and police children and that, when they're shifting all the time, yes, people sort of stand back a little bit. So then I began to blame the profession and the career of my father. Maybe it's, if I wasn't a minister's daughter, I wouldn't be like this. And then I'd look at my next sister down, who had a flourish of friends, and she was popular and everything. And I thought, oh, there goes that theory. So I could just never work it out. So, that subconscious trigger came in at the age of 15, I guess, when I built up in me, and bang, if I lose weight, change my body shape, change what I look like, then it will come. But once again, it was a subconscious thing. It was just something I went into.
And then when you said, it was just, and then you said, well, you put on the weight, but over a couple of years, I think our video might be okay. So when you put on, the weight intentionally, you said, but what was underneath? Like, if you don't fix what's underneath, it's going to take forms in other ways. So that's when you became, anxious, and you said you had some depersonalization as well, and some other things. How could you not? Honestly, like, it's, the question isn't, how, did that come out? It's, how could it have not come out? Of course, it has to manifest in some way, and I think now, these days, there is so much more help out there. But like you said, back in the day when you needed that, there wasn't. And I don't think there's anywhere you could have turned, It's just, it amazes me. I don't feel like you had any, like, I'm sad for that reason, that you didn't have anybody you could turn to, so I'm just picturing myself, without knowing what it is to be you. I would never know, but I'm just trying, I like to try to understand. And I know for me, teenage years were very confusing without all of these things. So yeah, it must have been very, very difficult for you. I'm interested and I'm intrigued on how you take all of that and you begin this healing process, like, how do you feel about yourself now that you understand? And now that, you don't accept necessarily, or maybe you do, but now that you understand so much more as an adult, how do you feel about yourself now?
Fine. I think because it was embedded in me for so long, every now and then you feel something come up. I might find myself in a social group or whatever, and something will happen, and you feel that little red flag, or that little trigger rather. But it's an easy thing to say, oh, can it, get rid of it. So no, I've come an enormous way from the fear-driven, quiet person that allowed everyone to walk all over her, and I wouldn't stand up for myself, because that was something else that I took on. I was too afraid to stand up for myself, because when I did at the age of 2, I was slammed and I was rejected, and I wasn't supported by the people that needed to support me or should have supported me. So that was another message that I took forward. So whenever I went to stand up for myself as an adult, in my marriage or in the work area, I wouldn't do it, because I was scared. 1, I wouldn't be taken seriously, but 2, no one else would support me anyway. So, and I didn't ever want to feel or be in that space again with the feelings that would come, you know, in with that experience. And I certainly had that a lot as an adult. I can remember a lot of experiences, particularly when my children came along in the way that I wanted to raise them and the messages I wanted them to have. And I wasn't supported by my extended families on either side. And all I did was bury the anger and get cross because I was too scared to stand up, because I didn't want to find out that I wasn't going to be supported and I'd have this battle. So, you know, there were a lot of, when I'm having this conversation with you, and I have realized it before, but every time it comes, you go, gosh, it impacted every area of my life.
Oh, yes.
The way I did it. But now, no, I feel fine about myself. I'm so glad that Joan came along when she did. I wish she'd come along earlier, but anyway, because my children are now about 7 and 4 when I came back from Darwin. So I'd already done damage, you know, particularly to my son at that point, by giving the same messages, even because you don't know that's what you're doing. You're just following the pattern that you think is right for life.
Yes. So you can't blame yourself now. Don't blame yourself, because that's what you knew at the time. So don't go down that road for sure. Yeah.
But I don't, but
yeah,
certainly with the children, you know, over time, I have sat down and I've explained, I've said, look, if there is ever a time when you are angry, that you remember and you go, oh my God, just pick up the phone and just do whatever you need to down that phone, and then we'll have a chat about it, you know, so that you can work that through. So
it sounds like you're an incredible mom. It really does. It sounds like you're very involved, and it sounds like you're changing the, you know, the cycle, right? You're really taking the time to learn and do differently. And I love that.
Well, I hope I am. And I sort of have to, because the little girl that I was given, oh boy, and I can see that was universal intervention. She's very headstrong.
Yes.
Very determined. She's a performer. They both are performer. And no one was going to tell her that she couldn't wear odd socks, or she couldn't stand on a chair at the age of 2 and swear at us all. We never swore in our home, and all of a sudden all these swear words were coming out of her mouth, and we thought, where did you learn those from? You must have brought them with you from a past life. I don't really know how they've entered your mouth. But she was, and I actually wrote an article for a Kidopedia, which is a group from Sydney, a parenting website, called To My Daughter with Love for Mother's Day. And it explains the role that my daughter played in my recovery, and how that headstrongness, and how the name we gave her, even because there was big debate, and the one that finally came down, how that actually suited, you know, the person that she become and the role that she played in my life. So she was a gift given to me to say, Mum. So she helped me let go and allow my children to go, for me to go from, this is how you have to be, this is how you have to live, to who are you and how can I support you in the life that you want to create for yourself.
That's
and
so
that
beautiful.
Was the huge change that I made with the help of Joan. Obviously, I did it for myself, because that's, but I handed that on.
That's what you wanted as a child, yes. For somebody to give you that freedom to express yourself, right? That's amazing. So how do we start? You know, you've told us like 3 or 4 major things that have happened, and each one has their own time of healing, and each one has their struggles of how do you start. So where do you start? Like, can you talk to us a little bit about the reality therapy, and, you know, just where do people start? Do they start at the beginning? Do they start, I don't know, how can we help people that are feeling similar?
Well, the people that I work with now, and I'll go back to, you know, what Joan did for me.
Yes.
The best place to start is with your thinking. And probably how I'm going to explain it today is great, but I also preempt it by saying, don't do it on your own. You know, take the points that I'm making, but then allow yourself to find that person who will work in this way beside you to assist you, because it will be difficult. I'm not going to say that it won't be, but if you've got someone in your lane working with you and supporting you, it makes the job a lot easier, of course, the process rather. So Joan began by looking at my thinking, because when I first walked through her door, I didn't know about the sexual abuse.
Okay.
It had been buried away and I had no recollection or anything of it. However, she wondered because of the behaviours that I was presenting to her. So we began to look at my thinking and where that thinking had come from, and how that thinking had shaped me. So we looked at my belief system, my value system, my needs and my wants as well. And with needs and wants, what do you need to make your life happy? And did I have those in place? And so with reality therapy, we look at 5 different needs. And the first one is love and belonging. And that was an eye-opener for me. Of course, I didn't have that anywhere. I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere, and I certainly didn't have the unconditional love that we all deserve. Then the others are survival. Well, I had that because I had a roof over my head, I had clothes and I had food and all of those sorts of things. Fun, I wasn't having any fun in my life because it was too hard. Freedom, I didn't have freedom. I was boxed into anxiety and fear and all of those things. And did I have any power? And by power, I don't mean power over. I mean, was I an empowered person? And no, I wasn't. So we began to unlock my story. We began by looking at, well, what is your story? What has shaped you? Where did you live? What did you do? How did you feel? What was your emotional status? So I'll stop because I'm getting out of whack here. So we looked at my thinking and the things around there, and we looked at my behaviours and what were the behaviours that I were adopting at the time that were an indication to why my body was hurting and why I'd become anorexic at the time. We also looked at my physical symptoms, and of course by now when I met Joan, the eating disorder wasn't an issue, but fear was, chronic fatigue was, migraines, suicidal depression, OCD. So we needed to look at each of those diseases and say, okay, why are they in your life? What are they telling you about you and how you have been taught to connect to this thing called life? And then we look at the emotional load. Okay, so if she asked a question and I immediately produced tears, or I was about to leave her office one day and she asked this question and I went into deep depression immediately. So I didn't walk out of her office. I stayed for another half an hour while we looked at why that question had created that emotional response in me and that withdrawn behaviour that I exhibited at the time. So we started to unlock and unpack all of those areas of my life and what was driving me, what was my main driver. We looked at fear. All right, what are your fears? Why are you feeling like that? Why is that fearful? Is it real for you? Where did it come from? And in each of these areas, is that your thinking or is that thinking somebody else gave you? Who are you really underneath all of this? So we did all of that hard work. But the eye-opener for me, Nelia, was when we looked at the relationship connections in my life. And we looked at how that had shaped me and
the lack of. Yeah.
The lack of proper relationship connections. And that's when the reality really hit me. Like what was my relationship like with my parents? Well, it was just laced with fear. Why was I afraid of these people? What had put that fear into place? And so we began to look at that. We looked at all the other relationships in my life, my married relationship, my relationship with myself. We looked at the relationships past and present, and those in the past, which I no longer had a connection with these people, but the impact of what happened when I was still living within me, and why I was adopting and believing the messages that were given to me, and then out of that, come, because I think you're healing, once you make a determined effort to heal, the universe will support that. And next thing, all of these contacts, all of these life events start to pop into your life and you go, whoa, hang on, I'm a little bit overwhelmed here. But if you see that as the universe responding to that person in you that says, enough, I want to heal, then you've got to find out what you've got to heal. So I had a lot of experiences come into my life that created more fear for me, but it gave us opportunity to look at, okay, this is the fear you're feeling. Let's unlock it. Let's unpack it. Let's see what's truth for you. And in amongst all that, and whether we believe it or not, I mean, I wouldn't have, but this certainly became a powerful message giver, was the dreams that I began to have. I began to have vivid dreams, dreams that told me my story. And I'm a poetry writer as well, and one I wrote was Centre Stage, and it tells the reader how the dreams at night became the messages to tell me my story. And that was when the abuse came out and sat up and looked at me, and then the memories of that. And because if I retold a dream, I would react, I would run and hide, I would cower up against the wall. You don't do those behaviours as if there's nothing behind it. So there was a lot for Joan to work with.
Yeah.
And I was ready to work with it as well, as exhausting and as tiring. And as I used to go at the back and throw bricks on my shed wall.
I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
Did you ever quit during the healing process?
I would quit in terms of just having time out to perhaps consolidate what I'd learned and what was coming to the foreground, because all of a sudden I had this enormous story unfolding, and alongside of it I still had to socialise within my family group, but I was learning a lot about this, and so I was having to wear the mask to go to the family things and then go away exhausted because I was covering all of this stuff. And but I want to keep, I guess at this point, for the audience to understand that I think if you're struggling with your healing, understanding who you are, why you are, and where you are in life, medication may be needed in some areas, like with depression and anxiety, OCD. It did have a role to play, and I'm not going to null and void that, but it wasn't the answer. It helped me cope with what the answer really was. And that was life events in my story, which had gone into this storage brain, this unit up here, become my truth and become the way I navigated and filtered this life ahead. And I needed to undo the scrambling, the configuration that was going on in my brain and bring it back to what was right for me.
I understand.
And so I had to change the thinking.
I understand when you say that medication does play a part. I know for me, it's like, it's not the answer, like what you said. Just when you said that, it kind of resonated with me, because without the medication, I don't think I could have started or been as successful with the healing. It gave me, enough to calm me down to be able to open up and to be able to do all those things. So there's certainly, I believe as well, a place for that, but not just that. There's got to be some things. Yeah, absolutely.
You need to be prepared to look at your life and look at what shaped you. And trauma is an awful shaper, and if trauma is still living in you unresolved and not reframed, and that's another word I like to use, is reframing. So if we go back to that little 2-year-old in the car that morning, when that memory first came up, I just went into deep depression and cried forever. And then we had to begin to look at it and reframe it. How was I looking and carrying that event? Well, I was carrying it as, it's all my fault, I'll be blamed, gosh, I've got to be a good little girl now, or all of these horrible things are going to, smash down onto me. And, the anger at my mother for not supporting me, the anger at my father for being so horrible to me, and all of those things that I took away, the picture I had of that experience. And I need to step back and say, okay, let's have a look at this again. What really happened on that Sunday morning? You triggered in my father.
He lost control is what happened.
Yeah, he lost control because he knew he was going to be outed. So he had to silence that pretty quickly, because he probably thought he already had, but he hadn't, because I was about to. So his fear created the response that he did. My mother, who I thought, why aren't you helping me? Her fear came into play, her fear of men, her fear of
being punished. Maybe
not being able to stand up, but also not wanting to acknowledge as well. If I don't hear it and I don't know about it, I don't have to deal with it, and we can all just keep moving down this road without having to deal with the reality, this elephant in the room here. So when I began to understand them and reframe it and put the reality back, and that's what reality therapy, let's look at the reality of it. And when we put the realness or the reality back into there, then I was able to free myself from the huge responsibility I took on and realize that no, there was no blame for me, no shame for me, no big whacking stick coming out for me, no exclusion or isolation from people who might hear the story because they would understand it. So, you know, I had to really do a lot of turning around of all of that. So it was a huge undertaking, and it did take, you know, a while, a number of years. And yes, I did stop and start out of exhaustion, but I was always brought back at the right time. It was almost like the universe was saying to me, let's have a break and let's just consolidate what we now learn and know. Let's go and try and have some fun in life. And then I'll tell you when to come back. And every now and then something would happen and I would go back and unfold a bit more of the story, and gradually over time let myself off the hook that I'd put myself in, and the straitjacket I'd put myself in as well, and let go of fear. And in the process, I was able to step back and adopt what I was learning for me and give that as a gift to my children. So when Brad, sorry, I'm using your names today, I don't usually do that. When Brad, at the age of 14, I remember coming home one day, and there on my kitchen table, the one I still sit at today, was all the yellow pages. If you know what the yellow pages are, they were a book.
Yes.
We had a book that had all the phone numbers and everything in it.
I remember.
You know, and they're all to tattoo parlors. And I thought, what the heck is this? And so I said, Brad, what are you doing? And he even had a design made that he was going to put under his arm. And I said, not under my watch, you're not. And so we had to talk about tattoos. Nowhere in the family, nowhere with anyone we mixed with or anything like that. And just something's come up on my, anyway. Sorry, something came up on my screen that's distracted me. So anyway, I was fairly well convinced that, you know, by the time he turned 18, when the time was that he said, when I'm 18, I'm an adult, I can do what I like, I thought he would have gotten over this. But anyway, sure enough, at 18, he came home one day with his arm all wrapped up in Glad wrap. And I thought it was a henna tattoo, and I thought he was taking the mickey out of me. But it wasn't, it was real. And that really challenged me. Even though I'd done a lot of work, it took me right back to my upbringing of people who have tattoos are horrible people. They're, you know, they're bikies, they're druggies, they're all of those sorts of things. And we don't have anything to do with that. Don't ever put a tattoo on your body. So it was, but by the time that came around, it was, okay, you're being challenged. There's a little bit of chipping away we've still got to do here. And your son has brought that chip in. So let's deal with it. So, and, you know, fast forward to now, and this is outlined, it's an intermission in my book. Let's just pop back to where the tattoos are up to. Let's just tell you where it's all at and how I'm feeling. By the end of the book, hopefully I'm there. And I do get there by the end of the book. But it's a little bit of intermission that I put throughout just to amuse people, hopefully. And now he's got almost a full sleeve on, you know, one arm. And he's
now and now you realize that it has nothing to do with who he is. It's just, well, it's an expression. Yes, sorry.
Both my children are extremely creative people. Kimberly's performed in Sydney, around the world, all that sort of stuff. And Brad went into music, and he's a singer, soloist, and all of that. He's also a very good artist. And I can see in the tattoos that he's created, they're of his own doing, his own creation. He's putting his story onto his arm.
I'd love to see that. Oh,
and when you go into each of the tattoos, you know, this is when I traveled overseas and I did this, and I went to Nepal and I did that, and that's embedded into here, and da-da-da. And in this compass, you've got this and the jewel of life. And when he explains it, you can only admire it.
Wow.
But
that's what I meant to say. I meant to say the opposite. I meant to say it's an expression of who they are, but it does not mean that they are not, you know what I mean? Like, it's so different than the meaning that you were taught when you were smaller, like when you were young.
That's
Like a
right.
part of me wants to hug that 2-year-old and say, none of this is your fault. You probably don't even understand what's happening. You have no clue as to what you did to deserve this. And the confusion is just like when you were talking about it. Sorry to interrupt you. I just...
No, that's absolutely fine. That's how a conversation goes. But you just said then, you probably didn't know. I do know now, and of course that's the outcome. I do know my story now, and all the sadness attached to that, and all the secrecy and the fear and everything attached to it all. It's little wonder my life couldn't have but helped go the way that it did. I had way too much stashed away there that needed to come out, and have reframed through the process of reality therapy and the different areas of reality therapy that we needed to lock into, explore, and help me unlock my life. So, yeah, and discover those keys, those pearls of wisdom that that I take forward, in my life from this point on, as you do, with what you've had to do.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you met Joan. During a lot of these podcast interviews that I have, there's always that one special stranger that becomes our lifeline, and she was that for you. And sometimes it makes me wonder, when I look back in my own life, if I hadn't met that one person, where would I be today? And it's just, I think it's beautiful when we can help one another, know that you're not alone, because you're completely correct in what you said. You cannot go through it by yourself. Number one, you cannot see things that other people can see. You're too close to the situation. It's not going to happen. And you need somebody to push you sometimes, or at least to make it safe and trusting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but you also need the knowledge, because what I didn't get until I was 37 was the knowledge.
Yeah.
I got the bullying, if you like, to put the weight back on. And I got medication, which just made every symptom worse. So I stopped taking.
You got Band-Aids.
Yeah, Band-Aids. But no one ever asked the big important questions. And I think the first question that needs to be asked is, tell me about your life. Tell me your story. I want to know what has shaped you. And I think that's where you need to start, because in that way you begin to understand their thinking and how they connect and respond to this thing we call life and the world around us. And until we know that about a person, how can we help them? So we need to understand those areas, those systems that we all have, our thinking systems, all of those indicators, our needs, our wants, our beliefs, but most importantly, relationships, because that is where we learn. We learn from the life events we have, and every life event usually has at least one other person attached to it, right, and teaching us, how life and how to respond and what not to do and all the rest of it. So, it's a minefield. It is huge, but it can be contained. It can be brought down, and a process of navigation, can unfold, along there. And of course, with eating disorders, alongside of doing the mental work, you need to do the nutritional work and appropriate exercise at the time. But that's also for anyone with any mental illness as well. Exercise, meditation, mindfulness, all of those wonderful healing modalities that we now know about also become a part of the recovery process. So, but unless we do the working out of sorting out this, the rest is a bit of a waste of time, So in conjunction, it can all come together and work for you. Yeah. And trust. Yeah. Trust is, because that's what we lose, when we've had difficult upbringings or sadnesses or loss and all of those things. Trust, certainly for me, went right out the window. And if you can bring that back in and let go and just trust the process that you're finding yourself in and not get frustrated. I wrote an article for a UK magazine yesterday on that very thing. Trust the process and don't get frustrated like me. I would get a window of an idea. Oh, what was that all about? And I'd get just a glimpse of, part of a life event. And but then that glimpse allowed me to look at it and unlock it and strengthen, so I could see the next part of the picture and then the next part. So sometimes all of our pictures don't come up and hit us all at once, otherwise that'd be too overwhelming. But for the audience to know that bits of information will come to you when you're strong enough to see them and deal with them and understand them. And looking back is a wonderful thing when you go through this, because you can then begin to see the process. And the more you can begin to see the process, the more you can develop that trust in it as well, and that there is a light at the other end. So
important to find somebody who's trained in those things, and find somebody you connect with, and don't be afraid to, move on to the next person if you don't have that. If the person is not, you need someone who's going to listen, who's going to really listen. Like, I love that you said, first, you just have to find out the story, because I've heard similar stories from different people, but so different. Like, some of the events are the same, but the perception and the feeling that is attached to those things, completely different. No two stories are the same. No, people don't suffer the same. People don't feel pain the same. People, don't take the same amount of time to heal. Everybody is different. And, and that's the lovely part of humanity, I think. It'd be boring if we were all the same. But, so I agree. You do need that person to guide you, that knowledge. Very important.
And I just, it's not only the knowledge, Nellie, because, different psychiatrists and other people that I met had some sort of knowledge, experience, but they hadn't had the experience.
Yes.
And so if you're seeking support, and that's what Joan gave me. She had her own story of sexual abuse, eating disorder. And so every word that came out of my mouth, even if before I spoke it, I thought, she's going to think I'm really dippy here. And I got to the point where I knew I could say anything, because I was saying it to someone who had said those words before or similar, and therefore understood where I was standing at that point in time. So I was never ridiculed or laughed at, not that a therapist would do that, but, I felt confident that even if it sounded really stupid, she would be able to pick up the threads of that and put it together, and understand why I would be speaking like that, but also know how to work with it to bring it to where it needed to be for me. So, and that's the other side. When you work in this way, you begin to identify patterns in your life. So abusive father, abusive men, abusive, or controlling. And I don't put my ex-husband in that. Yes, to his own admission, he controlled me through money, but he wasn't abusive. He wasn't violent. He wasn't any of those things. And the poor man had me to deal with, this fear-driven, uptight perfectionist. So goodness knows how he responded to that, he's probably so thankful that we separated in a way. And we have a good relationship now. We both worked at it for our children's sake, and he has a lovely new wife, and they live in Queensland. It's all lovely. So
that's great. Joan,
so I just want to make that point, that connect with someone who understands, because they've had the experience before you, so that they get you. And I think that's a quality that you would bring to clients. That's a quality I bring to my clients. And I think it's a really important one. Yeah.
Yeah. Life, I always say life is so difficult already. We all have our things, some bigger, some smaller, but our pain is still deep. And it just sounds like Joan was your first safe place after all those years. Feel so grateful for you that you guys found each other, because I think also, as being your therapist as well, and in helping you, you probably helped her without even knowing it as well, just to continue her own healing. So I think it does. Yeah.
And probably developing her skill as a psychologist as well. I think every client that we get helps us develop our skill better, to know what sentences to use and when to bring this in, and, when are they ready to hear this, and all of those skills, are honed over time. But I will also add that Joan was certainly the catalyst and the greatest support and the greatest educator for me about my life and who and why I had become. But she was replaced way down the track. And that's another thing, when people are healing, know that, people will be brought in at the right time to support you for where you're up to. So I did have a gap, and then, the universe came in, and I ended up with a male psychologist who works similarly to Joan. And I can see the value of Dennis, because he was a man.
Yeah.
So abusive. He was very kind. and very caring, and he understood me as well. So he gave me an experience of being able to work with a man who wasn't controlling, dominant, arrogant, and all of those things. He was a very different mold of a man. So it gave me the opportunity to connect with that type of male, because in my work environment, I certainly had the controlling, and, you know, I could go into stories about that. And those men were great in the end, because I learned to, with Dennis's help, he taught me how to stand up to controlling men in the career.
I love that. And he came at a good time during your healing, you know, and there are a lot of amazing men, a lot of strong, just great guys. But yeah, I could see how that gave you a whole new perspective, right? A whole new section, like a whole new way of thinking about things. That's great.
Yeah. So, and I just, because it's come to mind again when you were talking just before, you said, you know, people can have an experience but then take it on board in a totally different way. Like you and I might be in a social setting, have an experience, and then a year later we talk, do you remember when that happened? And you'll go, yeah, and blah, and I'll go, no, that's not, this is, you know, and we'll almost debate because we bring ourselves with us and we'll look at it differently. And that's an analogy going right back to the beginning of, you know, mental health issues, mental health development. It's how we take on a life event, how we view it, how we internalize it, that will influence how we move forward from there. So, for example, my sister, the next one down, who we never talked about it, she sadly passed away from cancer 2 years ago, and we were never given the opportunity, although I just know it's her story as well. But the conversations that we did have, our ideas that we bring to the same situation, you know, we both grew up in the same house, but we look at it very differently.
Same
so
with
the life events that
yes.
are different to mine, but you would think we'd have the same conversation, be on the same page, but we weren't. So it's really important to nut in and get to that as well and say, okay, this is the life event. This is how you've taken it on board. This is how it's affected you and impacted your mental health development. We need to go back and work out why. You know, I could talk about this forever, but we haven't got forever.
You know what? If it's okay with you, I would really love for you to come back on and speak to us about anorexia, as like just about that, because I think that's going to help, you know, some people as well, if you're willing to.
Absolutely. I would enjoy that opportunity. We can make an arrangement. And I'll pop back on again, and this time I'll put the makeup on and get dressed properly.
You look beautiful. I just wanted to say too, my brother and I grew up in the same home, and we're 4 years apart, and 4 years doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're a kid, you know, one's entering high school, one's leaving high school, you're still in very different places. And then for people to say, oh, Nelia, what you feel is not what happened. It used to make me angry because I know how it made me feel. I know, you know, how things affected me, even if they affected you differently, or even if you didn't see that I was going through all these things, you know, you do have to put away the anger before you can move forward, you know, and it's so true when you said that, you know, even people within the same family or within the same group, you know, even two classmates going to the same, you know, hanging out with the same friends can have such different outtakes and such different experiences and feelings. And it's just, it's amazing. Life amazes me. It really does.
So in terms of that one, you know, you've got to put your anger aside, but I guess when it first comes up, you've got to unlock that pain. You know, what is embedded in that anger for you? Forget about your brother and your sister and everybody else, but we're working with you right now. What is within that anger, and why is it that you're looking at it through that way, and work it out for you? And I think that's a really important step to take.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel about this, but for me, when I'm dealing with the anger part, just really quickly, it's more, or when I hear someone's story, it's more, I almost want to say to the person who created all the chaos, how dare you change this person's life? Who gives you the right to change who I am? And that's what makes me so angry. When I do become angry is, and that still comes up for me sometimes, but it's like, how dare you do that? Like, who has the right, to change how I feel about myself, to change how I deal with life, to change how, what I care about, what I don't care about, how I feel about myself. Nobody has the right to take those things away from us. So it's so important. If you guys are listening and you feel stuck and you don't know what to do, just take one small step. One step is moving forward. Just don't stay where you are. Try to find somebody you can trust, somebody that you can speak to, even if it's just, little by little, and realize that it is going to take a long time. It's, you didn't get where you are overnight.
That's right. So I'm just writing this word down so I don't forget it. With what you just said then, the how dare you do this and that, I wonder if the sense is, how dare you do not validate me?
Absolutely.
You haven't validated me and my experience and who I am. You've just brushed it aside like it's not important, but hey, it's important to me. And I think that's, again, in society, we do that too often. Someone will say, oh, but blah, and I've certainly had those experiences where you almost laughed at, or you just brushed aside, or you walked away from. And and so it's that validation, and that would make me angry as well. I certainly relate to you on that one, because we're not validated. I was not validated.
Ignored. You feel invisible.
And I'm not validated today, the age I am now. I am still not being validated by a family who has turned their back on me and turned me away because they don't want to face the secrets. They don't want it outed in society. They don't want the embarrassment and all of that. So it's easy to scapegoat me and get rid of me and paint me in a picture that doesn't belong to me so that I won't be believed. And that's another layer. So there's so many layers, that I've had to deal with. But validation is, a huge thing. But unfortunately, and I hear what you're saying, Elliot, there's so many people's names popping into my head right now where I acknowledge, the how dare you. How dare you treat someone like that? How dare you? Must have known that when you did that, that would be the outcome for that person. How can you sleep at night? Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask that question of them, because somewhere in their repertoire of learning how life works, they learned that it was okay. And to us, it's just like, how?
So much we could talk about, like, honestly.
So many layers, right, that happen. Yeah. But validation, and I think that's what reality therapy did for me as well. It validated my story. It validated who I had become as a result of my story, but it also gave validation to the person I really was underneath, and allowed that person to come out and to exist, in life comfortably and without fear as well. So that's what that whole process, allowed me to achieve, and allows me to give that on to people, not only my children, but obviously clients, but also in the role as a school teacher when I was a home ec teacher, and in a role as a relief now. There's so many times when I see fear in my students and I go, whoa, what's happening in his life or her life, and it's really important then how I conduct myself and how I relate to that child, so that I don't repeat the pattern in the classroom for them. So it's really opened my eyes of awareness, and I've been a very popular teacher as a result of it. But it's simply because I took the learnings of reality therapy into that classroom arena and did it. So it's been a hugely value addition to my life.
And, just in having this conversation with you today, I know that you will be the Joan for somebody.
Yeah.
I can tell that it's just the way you express yourself and the way you're passionate about, letting people see that there's an out, so I believe that you will be that for many people.
Well, I hope so. And that's not an arrogant, I hope so. It's the,
let's cure,
that's part of me that wants to come out and see, waken the world up, I guess, to the main thing, how we relate impacts. That's the main thing.
So
it has
true.
a huge impact. And to take responsibility. You know, I've taken responsibility. I rang my ex-husband probably a few years ago. We had something happening with our daughter, and I took the opportunity. I always knew I would do it one day, and he was just about to hang up, and I said, before you go, I want to say sorry. Or wherever that sorry belongs for you, because I don't know. But being married to me must have been difficult. I was a perfectionist. I was this, that, the other. And so I'm really sorry for how I impacted you in your life. Put that where it needs to be for you.
It's beautiful.
And he just dead quiet. I didn't know what to say. I probably wouldn't have known either. And I said,
it's so great that you did that.
We'll see you next time. Bye. And I hung up, you know. But I think it's really important to take ownership. Yeah.
I'm so glad that you did that. It's like the book that I just released, my husband, I asked him, I said, would you mind writing a short chapter on what it's like to live with me? And he did. And I read it and I was like, oh yeah, you know, I can see that. But, you know, yeah, we all need someone in our corner, but.
Yeah, we do.
Thank you for sharing your story today. And we've got to definitely have you back, because I need to learn a little bit more as well about anorexia, so that I can, you know, perhaps say the right things, help somebody out there as well. So I'd like to be educated by you if that's okay. You know, in the future, I would love to learn a bit more, because I honestly, I don't know a lot about it. And I think that that's a shame, you know, that I need to learn a little bit about that. Where can we find your book and your website and all those wonderful places where we can, I know that you've got a free course that you offer on your website, like an introduction. Do you want to tell us a bit about that? Yeah.
So last year I set up an online business with the view of creating probably programs to support people with eating disorders. But having said that, I could have called it Mental Illness Unlocked or Illness Unlocked, because the programs can lend themselves to an eating disorder or any other illness, really. So my website is JL Keez, and Keez is spelled K-E-E-Z, jlkeez.com.au. And going to my website, you will find a link there to my book. And I would just say that the book's going through a revamp as we speak, and should the new version, the second version, should be out around the end of August, early September. I did that because I met an award-winning author and journalist. Not that I knew that. This person just asked if they could read my book, and they did, and then she wanted to meet me, and then I found out who she was, and I was highly embarrassed. But anyway, she's travelled the world and done all these things. But she loved the book. She just held it in her hand and said to me, this is a beautiful book that needs to get into the hands of many people across our globe. And I went, oh, okay. And she said, but I want to get it industry ready, because I self-published. So I did it.
Yes.
And she said, it is fine as it is. It is absolutely fine as it is. But I want it in libraries. I want it in bookstores. And I know what the industry will and won't accept. So she's revamped inside at a grammar level. And so it's exactly the same, just the grammar's been improved. The cover will be quite different. So if you purchase it at the moment, you'll still get the same story, the same inspiration. None of that will change, or wait until August and get the new version. But there is a link to how to access that through Amazon as an ebook or a paperback. There is also, as you've indicated, Nelly, a free program, a link to the free program, and it tells you about that and what I offer. What I'm finding with people that do access my programs, I think they're expecting, as eating disorder clients, to learn about diet culture, all of those things that they seem to connect with eating disorders at the moment, you know, social media and how to contend with all of these things. And it's nothing like that. It's reality therapy. It will take you, you will have my story running beside what I'm asking you to do for you as a person. And I embed my story into it to hopefully provide understanding. So if they're not quite sure, oh, here's an excerpt out of my life, oh, okay, I get it now. Let's go back. It's a lot of exercise. It's a lot of exploration about looking at who you are and why you are and all of those things. So
How
it's a
did we
very
get here?
different program.
Yes.
So if you go to the free program, it is 20 pages long. Don't freak out about that. I try to put into it all the little areas that I think you need to look at and give you little, bits of information. So that's the free program. And then there are there's a 3-part program. There's a nutrition program. There's a relationships program as well. And there's one I designed just for teenagers because you're a different age group to the adults. And so hopefully that's a little bit more user-friendly. So all of those can be found via my website.
Wonderful.
I think I'm done.
I really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much. I think it's going to really help the listeners. So I appreciate you coming on here and sharing with us and teaching us and spreading your wisdom.
And I've enjoyed being here and particularly getting to know you more as a person rather than just an email conversation.
Same with me. Yes, thank you. I love meeting new people. And I'm not one for small talk. I like to just get right in there. And I don't know. I would much rather have, a deep one-on-one conversation where it actually means something. I'm not a small talk. Yeah. I feel very uncomfortable with small talk.
Yeah. You want to get something out of it, out of the conversation, and you want to give something, from your knowledge, but for somebody else's knowledge bank as well. Yeah.
Thank you. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, same here.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe or leave a review. See you next week on the Giving Starts With You podcast.